our customers compete with anyone when it comes to hyperscale and efficient hardware.
How do you lead that?
Number one reason a company fails is they don't get market transitions.
Absolutely. I think the industry is going through a tremendous transformation.
Hey Basil, good to see you.
Hey Steve.
Our industry is going through some absolutely huge transitional changes. I mean, almost revolutionary, really.
True.
Give us your perspective on what's happening right now.
It is a really interesting time right now. And if I look back the last decade or so, we've been building this IP network, which started as a service on the side in our customers, and now has become the foundation for all services. And that fundamental change separated services from the network, decoupled it. And now, with a decade of building that network and building access to that network, it used to be we had a fairly constrained access, which tied applications to run in various places. With the access network now being built out to where we have a more unconstrained access capacity, applications are now moving. It's kind of like they're flowing around the network. So now we need a network that's super agile, still super high performance. So it's put a bunch of stress. And it's all coming together in the term cloud now. So for our customers, this means we have to continue to build the current network we're building, but we also have to respond to these requirements that are new, the agility, the performance of the network. And we have changing business models at the same time.
Right.
A lot of change.
Yeah. When you're talking to your largest customers, do you find that there's sometimes a disconnect internally at those customers between what they think they want and what they actually need today?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, building big networks or big systems like this, people who have been in it for a long time know that it's an evolution. Not only an evolution in technology, because it takes time to build these big networks, big systems, to change the systems once they're entrenched. But I think people sometimes forget it's a big evolution also for end customers. There's a leading edge of end customers that quickly go to the latest thing. But there's a whole set of, let's say, pragmatist majorities that take a bit of time before they change. So what our customers really have to do is help their customers actually migrate services, and make sure they're capturing the value of what the customers want to do today, but also looking towards the future. So yes, there's a disconnect because you have to at once do a great job of what you're currently doing for your customers. And this is not only our customers, it affects us. But you also have to be aggressive about about the future, because you want to be in the early part of that architectural change. So in some ways, because of this big shift we're going through right now, it's putting additional stress. Not only do we have to build a next-gen routing platform with next-gen silicon that's got great performance, but we also have to think about virtualization and SDN, and we have to do them in parallel.
Yeah,
and our customers as well,
And I was going to ask you about virtualization. Do you feel like your customers are all in on virtualization? They're sold on the concept, and that's happening. And how quickly is it happening? Where are we in the virtualization journey with most of your customers? Because I think if you read the articles in the press and even some of the analyst coverage, you'd kind of assume it was everywhere right now. But that's really, in the network sense, that's really not the case, right now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, virtualization, I'll say something maybe a little controversial, but I think virtualization is a little bit less dramatic than maybe the industry, let's say, maybe thinks it is at the moment. Or put it this way. Virtualization is running any process on an x86 processor or a virtualized x86 processor in a container. It's just another way to run the process. The key is that the application has to be run somewhere. And so what is it really all about? It's really about flexibility and price point, and their ability, if they look at operational ease, flexibility, and price point. But yet, in the end, one way or another, there has to be an MME, or there has to be a PGW, or there has to be a BNG. It's there, whether virtual or not. So I think customers, after their initial, let's say, understanding of the benefits, which I think are real, flexibility, less bespoke hardware, a little more agility, and cost perhaps, then they have to settle back to, okay, what's the reality here of where does it make sense? Where does it not make sense? And that's the phase we're in right now, I think, as an industry, is we're getting down to, okay, we've got kind of these high-level models. The question now is, what functions are we going to go fast on, and what functions are we going to say, you know, that's interesting, but it's not such a big impact to the bottom line, and you know, it carries a certain risk.
Well, the risk reward is maybe
the risk reward's
out of
not
alignment.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what's going on.
And I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, we talked before about things like packet core, where a misstep could be potentially catastrophic for 1 million subscribers or
Correct.
more.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you don't have to push everything out into the virtual world immediately.
Right. Immediately, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, let me ask you an unfair question. What's more important to the success of your tier 1 customers, culture or technology?
Wow, interesting. Culture or technology? Well, I would always go culture than technology, because, I mean, you know, in the end, a company is only as good as it navigates the market. And with culture, the proper culture, you can navigate the market and all its changes. And technology is a point in time, I guess. So I would argue, most importantly,
As always,
is the team and culture.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
You know, the virtualization standard situation seems like a bit of a hot mess right now.
Yeah.
You know, you guys at Alcatel Lucent and you personally are considered an authority on all of this stuff.
Yep.
What are you doing to help your customers with, you know,
Yeah,
unpick this? Because they are, you know, one of the only things which is clear is that they are unclear on what the heck is happening with virtualization standards. Right?
That's right, yeah. So virtualization is funny, right, because you, on the one hand, if you want to just take one function and virtualize it and say, there I have it, and even roll it out, that's one thing. If you want to create a horizontal infrastructure on which you can load many applications and scale those applications and deal with the interactions between those applications and keep it consistent, that's quite another.
Right.
I think the industry's in the first camp kind of moving along on certain functions, and packet core is one of them, where we have real customers really investing. We're building those systems for customers now. And then there's, though, the desire to build that horizontal infrastructure, and that requires a lot of standardization. I mean, the challenge here is that in the past, our customers could point at one vendor and say, that function's yours, and if it breaks, I'm expecting you to fix it. And I don't necessarily need to know, what those interfaces are inside. Now we're saying, okay, we're going to have a set of functions that have, we have compute from someone, we have a mana layer from someone, a virtualization software from someone, we have an application from someone. So this creates a whole bunch of complexity. I think the most important thing we can do to help sort it out, honestly, at this point, because I think there's enough work on frameworks, is pick the use cases that are most compelling to our customers from a value point of view, and implement.
And move it forward.
And implement. And as we implement, it's very similar, by the way, to the past.
So actions speak louder than words.
Well, what it does is it forces some clarity in an otherwise unclear situation where you don't know necessarily what the weighting should be on every item. But we start to implement. So if I think back to MPLS in the early days, when it was theoretical, there was a lot of standards, a lot of interaction. A good one is MPLS and Ethernet. What's the difference? Meaning, should use MPLS, should use Ethernet, blah, blah, blah. In the end, it was implementing and trying to get something built that forced some clarity back.
I think that that's the best answer I've heard to that question this year, because it really is about what does it actually do, and let's stop talking about it. But also, if you divide the network into layers, service providers and enterprises want a free market economy at the infrastructure layer. They want Whitebox and interoperability, and they want open source. We don't want a free market economy in the standards bodies. We don't want people competing to have the best, most muscular standard specification. And there's a lot of sort of conceitful development work going on standards right now. So I think you've answered the question really well, which is, leaders lead, and they go out and they build networks for their customers, and they make them money or save them money, and that's what will decide this argument. I agree. Not a debate.
And I do think, sorry to interrupt, but I do think it is important while you're doing that, because of our industry, if you look at the success of our industry, it's fundamental that we do get standards. Because if you look at routing itself, without BGP, without the IGP, without the work that was done, we wouldn't have created what we created. So it is important that while the leaders, whoever chooses to do that, go and implement with customers and really kind of push the state-of-the-art forward, you do keep that hand in the standards bodies to try to make sure that we ultimately end up with the standards we need.
But there needs to be some sort of ombudsman in the industry saying, hey, you know what, there should be a barrier to entry here. more than
Absolutely.
business class fare to fly to Switzerland or wherever the latest standards committee is.
Right, exactly.
Because the service providers are saying, I don't want to employ a division of people to track these
Right.
standards. So as you know,
Yeah.
Light Reading is participating in this new IP agency to
Exactly.
monitor, not
Yeah.
develop standards, but just monitor them. And hopefully that'll be another part of the solution. But yeah, it is kind of a mess, but these things
Yeah.
have a way of working themselves out.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a big economic issue, which is the telco capex crunch, which is going on right now.
Sure.
For you as a leader at Alcatel Lucent, where do you think the growth is going to come from for your company in the face of service providers kind of pulling in their spending in some ways?
Well, it ebbs and flows and it's geographical, of course. I wouldn't say globally we have a capex crunch per se. We have regional weakness in some regions or sub-regions based on economics that are going on there, competition, regulatory. Right now, EMEA is quite strong, and maybe after a period of weakness of underinvestment, perhaps. So at this point, we're seeing that that trend. On the other hand, some of the other economies are getting a little tougher. But I think in general, backing up, as I said before, there's this confidence we have, I would say, in the value chain overall, meaning the network will be built. I think the thing to keep, and it will be built not only by our service provider customers, but also by web scale players, by guys who are starting to build bigger and bigger IP and optical backbones, as an example. But I think the thing to keep an eye on is whether or not the economic equation to the end customer continues to work.
Right.
In other words, as we subsume video, what's the next application that's going to have enough value to drive the investment?
Right.
That one's interesting. I think we see clearly right now we're in the middle of a massive bandwidth deployment for video and for mobility. It's interesting to consider what comes after.
Right, right.
You can say 4K video, and then what? Okay. And I understand there's a confidence in our industry that there's always going to be more demand than supply, but we also need enough demand that has strength. So you don't need just demand.
Right.
I mean, I would like more bandwidth. That's not really demand. Demand is I need more bandwidth to do something, and it's valuable to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think 5G also is just a kind of a randomizer effect, because nobody really knows what the impact of throwing that out in front of consumers and saying this is going to feel 1,000 times faster.
Yeah.
What do they use that for, and what applications do people start developing that were science fiction 10 years ago?
That's right.
Which become reality.
Yeah.
Ubiquitous video conferencing, for example, from
For
anywhere.
sure. And by the way, it was so interesting, right? As you see the cost to run video conferencing come down, certainly it's getting more and more ubiquitous. And as the friction to use video conferencing comes down, FaceTime, other things, it becomes more ubiquitous. And we have Internet of Things. So there's Internet of Things. So there's a lot of forces at play right now. I remain pretty confident in the value being high enough to continue to, with the ebbs and flows we talked about, continue to propel the industry.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Whitebox open source revolution again. I mean, John Chambers, just before he resigned as CEO, told me that he thought that Cisco's competitors in the future will be all Whitebox vendors.
Yeah.
None of the existing.
So he said it's Whitebox vendors and I'm out.
Yeah, he said, and goodbye and thanks for all the fish. No, I mean, he literally did sort of just say, see ya. This one's on you guys.
Good luck.
And good luck with that. And his media handlers sort of reacted in a kind of stunned way, because he was incredibly candid. He also said half of his service provider customers will go out of business. So it was kind of a, just FYI.
Oh, by
you
the
better
way,
take care of this. I mean, what do you think of that assertion?
Maybe a little bit more nuanced answer I would try to give to that, because it's I think what is a white box is a somewhat open question. If by white box you mean a simplified IP transport layer that's really just moving bits, I think that's inevitable. And I think if that's your definition,
interoperable
and interoperable
heterogeneous,
as well. Heterogeneous for sure.
Yeah.
We're already heterogeneous. I mean, I think by that definition,
we're kind of there.
We're there. Well, and all vendors will, and I say we're there, all vendors will play that game, because that's our game. That's what we do. We build, our lifeblood is delivering the lowest cost per bit in a reliable, high performance way.
Right.
So, if there's a way to do that, whether it be changing our approach to the design somehow, let's say reducing services because we've decided to do those services at different layers, we have to embrace. So when I look at a spine switch that comes out of a Whitebox player and I look at a router that comes out of a router player, my view over time, those don't look that much different.
Right.
They don't look that over time.
So the router follows the path of the Ethernet switch.
Well, it's interesting, more the other way around, because if you look at a data center switch in the past, data center switches in the past have been Ethernet switches. And data center switches of the future will be either MPLS or more likely IP routing platforms.
Right.
And that's what's happening. When you do the overlay in the data center, the core of the data center becomes pure IP.
Yeah.
And then you have to ask the question, okay, if that's an IP platform, if it has the right software to carry the internet route table, and it has the right route table size, and it can handle ACLs and the features you need, then that can play a role. So you might argue in the future there'll still be a couple of price points.
Right.
One is, a data center spine switch is really hard cut down in terms of its capabilities, but still is moving IP packets at a tremendous rate. And then there's a core router that has a bit more capability, but honestly, those are going to get a little closer over time. So in that case, if that's what your definition of Whitebox is, moving bits cost effectively, we're all going to be Whitebox players.
I guess one of the definitions which I heard, which resonated with me, is we're separating the hardware from the software and the infrastructure from the service.
Yeah.
Now the network operating system is downloaded. Yeah. And it's open source. Yeah. So the inference is it's free. Yeah. Or near
right. Yeah. Well,
that's utopian.
Yeah.
But that's what I think a lot of people are starting to think. The 10 or 20-year vision is it's not about cost. It's not about network infrastructure. That essentially becomes like voice traffic on a wide area network. It's free. It's cheap. It's made in Taiwan, whatever. Yeah. And then not to diminish the role of IP vendors today. What's happening at that intelligent layer? Is it possible that it's some sort of Linux-based open downloadable software?
Sure.
And I think that's kind of pretty unlikely myself, but that's what a lot of
two trends. You're highlighting a good point. Two trends. I spoke to the first one, which was moving bits cost effectively. We're all going there. We're already there, and we're going there, and we'll continue to pursue those things. Whether it's commercial silicon, your own silicon, it doesn't really matter in the end to a customer. Some customers have preferences, but the reality is it's delivering cost per bit in an effective way. Then the question is of the software versus hardware is another one. One thing's clear. A lot of the high-function software that currently runs our routing platforms will migrate to NFV instances. Okay, so that takes that piece out. What's left is the really core routing algorithms, BGP, the IGPs. The question of whether those really ultimately be separated, meaning running on a server, and the thing is just a forwarding element, I think is much more controversial. Meaning, can it be done? Oh yeah, I mean the technology's been there for 10 years.
Isn't that right?
It's a question of performance, benefit, reliability. Could that happen? It's possible, but I think it's much less likely because I think the benefit to it is to your point, is not quite as high. And in the end, what customers really want is they want a very high performance, low cost transport system to move bits. Now, will that become de minimis in the scheme of things? I don't think so, because it's not like the narrowband case where voice disappeared into a sea of this. We're still talking about moving massive numbers of bits, number one. And the thing that's always striking to me nowadays, which I think is maybe lost sometimes in the conversation, I'm stunned at what's running on these networks. Everything's running on them. They have to work.
Right.
You can cut corners to a degree, but you have to make sure whatever architecture you come up with still has survivability and reliability, and it has to be extremely good.
And it comes back to that whole issue of false economy.
It's even more more important. In fact, in our industry, I'm starting to feel a little bit more like Boeing when there's a failure than the days of old when it was like, okay, we'll look at it later. It's a task force. You're on it because you just brought down the police force, the hospitals. You brought down the economy. You brought down everything. So the intensity on a failure is only going up.
Well, I mean, and if you look at it, the view from the satellite or the view from Saturn is that we're not building a network, we're building a global digital economy. So if the economy based on the network
is resting on that network, so we got to be careful with that.
It may go in the other direction.
Yeah.
But I tell you, I mean, one of the things which I think is if we want to know what the future of next-gen communications looks like in 5 years' time, you open the door on a data center at Google or Amazon or Facebook today, right? Because they are essentially building white box networks and they're just doing whatever the hell they want because they've got limitless money and limitless intellectual capacity. So it kind of gives us an insight. But you sell to those companies as well. So isn't that like a clue to what the future is, that there's always going to be a value?
A bit of both, right? Yeah, and I think the white box piece that you're referring to is, data center switching and data center networks. The largest of these guys, they can and will sometimes do it themselves, whether it means buying software or building their own. But then there's also a piece where it doesn't really make sense necessarily to do that, where they're going to buy technology from a vendor. So I'm quite comfortable with the way that evolves over time. I think we're going to get into a situation where, from time to time, our largest customer is going to choose it. And by the way, that's not even that different than some of our current customers have built a lot of their own tools, a lot of their own OSS stuff over time. They've decided when to build what. That's kind of part of playing with large customers that have resources.
Right.
What I need to do, what the vendors need to do, is specialize and do a super great job at what we do, so that we can offer, better value.
Well, I mean, you have to focus on what you're doing, but you also have to take into account, the Uber trends going on in the industry. One of them is development of VNFs to run on different platforms.
Yeah.
I mean, are you going to support other people's VNFs on your infrastructure?
Totally, absolutely. I mean, if you look at what we did, there's two things we did. I'll just 3-4 years ago when we started our projects that are meant to, that are kind of the main touch points. But there's others inside of the company that are focused on this big shift we're going through. Nuage, Cloudband, which are projects inside of Alcatel Lucent, but also our NSP platform, which we announced. These platforms are all multi-vendor, and they're not multi-vendor, by the way, Steve, on PowerPoint. And we've done integrations now. If you would have asked me 5 years ago, would we be doing the integrations we're doing on Nuage, and I know each of them, I would have said, no way.
Right.
We are really doing that in a hardware-independent way.
Right.
And it's because we have to.
Right. And are you seeing a big move to carrier SDN? And are operators keen on the idea of BGP end-to-end across WAN and data center without a LAN WAN gateway? Is that a trend that you're seeing?
Say that again. I'm not following the question.
Are operators keen on the idea of a BGP end-to-end implementation across WAN and data center without a LAN WAN gateway in between it?
I think so. We started, if what you're referring to, which I think this might be what you're referring to, in order to get a common SDN infrastructure across the wide area.
Right.
One way to do that is across MPLS VPNs, in which you use BGP to peer across MPLS VPNs, and I think they are super interested in that because it leverages their current infrastructure and allows them to do that. You can also do it by basically using BGP to peer between the SDN controllers directly.
Right.
We support that today, and so we were one of the first companies, if not the first, to say an SDN controller alone that doesn't have federation, and federation you could read, we used BGP for federation of SDN controllers, is not very useful because it's a nice experiment, but in the limit, the largest providers, they're going to have many SDN controllers.
Right.
And they're going to have to federate.
Right.
So, and BGP is clearly the right tool to use for that in our view.
Let's talk about you personally for a minute. So, you're a technology enthusiast, you're an evangelist, you're a leader of people within Alcatel Lucent through this extraordinary period of history in the communications industry. You seem very engaged still, but you're at a company which keeps on going through these huge changes. I mean, you have a major merger coming up.
Yeah.
Are you still all in on your job today as much as you were before?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to me, this is a good evolution for Alcatel Lucent and for Nokia. I think the timing's good. The companies are at points where it makes sense to come together. And I guess my model of large companies is, large companies are a bit of a platform on which to do things. And that's how we've looked at it over time.
Right.
So whether it's Alcatel Lucent, all large companies rely on teams inside of them driving an agenda, and our agenda is building big IP networks and scalable networks that our customers can rely on. So I see that continuing, and I see it even expanding a bit because of the broader context we'll have in the industry.
I definitely think it's, your needs match up, don't they? Because
Yeah.
you have the IP, peerless IP expertise, and they have the mobility expertise, but they also bring things like system integration and global scale and things like that. So I guess the main question is
good match that way.
Yeah, good match on the technology and services side. It's going to come down to culture, isn't it? Finland.
Yeah.
And New Jersey.
That's right.
But,
and California.
And California. Well, I'm joking in a sense, but not in a sense I'm not. Have you been to Finland yourself?
I have. I've been to even Oulu, which is at the very top of Finland, which is...
Did you do saunas? And
I did not.
You did not?
I did not.
Okay, well, you're not...
It might be in my future.
Oh, it's in your future. Yeah. I mean, the first business trip which I did as a technology journalist was to Finland, and half an hour after I got off the plane, I was naked with a beer in a sauna with a bunch of executives from Nokia, and it's taken me about 25 years to recover from that one. So, yeah.
I'll try to avoid that. But in seriousness, the company Alcatel Lucent has had to get used to this multinational thing.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting because we have Paris still very important in the company,
Absolutely.
New Jersey, California, but also Shanghai. So I mean, it's
you have some experience.
We have some experience with this kind of thing.
You've been forged in the fire of acquisition and merger, and I think that's very useful experience as you go through this again. I wish you every success with it. It's a fascinating story. You've done a great job. I really appreciate you taking so much time with me today. I always learn something when I see you, Basil.
Appreciate it, Steve. Likewise.
All right.
Thank you.
Cheers.
See you.
Our customers compete with anyone when it comes to hyperscale and efficient hardware.
How do you lead that?
Number one reason a company fails is they don't get market transitions.
Absolutely. I think the industry is going through a tremendous transformation.